new talent post-COVID-19. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite our next speaker. So this is the period of pandemic. So the message I'd like to share with us is that we should avoid feeling too panicked in this situation. So let's welcome Professor Lee Hui-soo, professor at Hanyang University. So Professor Lee Si-young talked about healing and resilience, and President Jeffrey Jones talked about the lightning speed. And now I'll talk about something extremely slow, because the study of anthropology, it is not a desk-bound study. This is the study about this culture and to try to study the culture and identity. And my areas of specialty is North America, North Africa rather, and the Middle East. So I want to share my own perspective as to how the human life should change and evolve in the period of COVID-19 and post-COVID-19. So this is the picture taken as of now in Mecca. So 1.8 billion Islam population should visit Mecca. So usually you have a gathering of 3 million at any given time, but it is completely empty. So now we are struggling economically, and we need to focus on the more vulnerable. But this is the global phenomenon, and the whole world is experiencing something that is extraordinary. So this is the first spiritual and the religious panic that has never happened in the past 1,400 years. And they have started this pilgrimage with the social distancing. And this pilgrimage started only in a limited fashion for people with a disability and the vulnerable population. And it is a ritual when you have this services, because you have to have the shoulder to shoulder. If you have a spaces between these people, is that there will be the passage of Satan, so it is not allowed. But because of this extraordinary situation, then you allow the social distancing on the grounds that the Allah will appreciate the pandemic and the situation that we live in. So because of this mass consensus, then it is allowed. And the Ramadan was not celebrated. And that has never happened in the 1,400 years of history. Because of COVID-19, the tradition has been distorted and it has to be completely changed. And it is happening in different parts of the world. And what kind of significance it will have on us. So the Korean brand, as was mentioned by Dr. Lee, and especially at least in the Middle East, it has the highest value at this moment, the brand of Korea. Circling around Iran, so the Korean drama called Daejangum, it has the highest ranking, so the viewership was 60%. And last year, BTS, this boy band, actually had a concert in Saudi Arabia. And armies, the fan club of BTS, they were wearing this black hijab, and they were jumping around and enjoying this music. And this social change was brought about by the Korean boy band called BTS. So, of course, there are some controversies locally, but because of the dedication and the transparency of the medical professionals and the IT technologies, that we were able to handle the situation to a certain degree, that we were able to maintain a certain degree of human dignity and control the virus. So that has improved the national recognition and national status, and it has become the brand of Korea has become very popular. So in that regard, then we have a golden opportunity. Biomedical, halal food, and K-beauty, and the pharmaceuticals, and cultural contents, and the K-wave. Well, this is the brief introduction into what is happening in the area that I've been studying. So let's look at the lives in the past century. Of course, that we were able to maintain the sustainable supply and demand in the war, and a large number of natural disasters play a certain role. So we talk casually about the World War One and World War Two, but that was this indeed World War. And of course, there are some differences according to who to speak to, but 78 to 80 million casualties happened during the World War II. Of course, there were large size scaled warfare like Vietnam War, and but it does not have any significant effect on the composition of the human population, and it has never happened before. In in this era that we live in, then there would not be any nuclear warfare. I suspect that, and we will overcome COVID-19. And we believe that we can survive this COVID-19. So the large-scale warfare and massive pandemic is something that we can definitely overcome. But of course, there could be some limitations. As an anthropologist in the post-COVID world, I think we are at the historical threshold. So for us to maintain the sustainable supply and demand, then unless there is a fundamental change in the way of life, then how else we can overcome this global pandemic? So this is the time where we need to have this more fundamental thought process that involves a major change. In this area, then there is a rise in the nationalism, but if you look into the much longer human history, then the history of evolution is becoming face-to-face into non-face-to-face. In the past, that you have to hunt and gather, risking their lives. And when you barter, you have to travel a very long distance. So it was a strictly face-to-face economy. But let's think of how we live our lives. Is that we do home shopping, mobile shopping, and we do this virtual conferences and AI. So we have progressed into the non-face-to-face. And this is a very important course of the human evolution. Well, immediately after the independence, I visited Uzbekistan right after Uzbekistan independent. So there were not a lot of TV in the village that I visited, but there was one TV at that village, and there were dozens of people who were gathered in front of the TV. And they didn't even had the term calling TV. So it was called Ainai Jihan. What it means was at the mirror reflecting of the world. So how amazing is that? Is that the world that you have to travel around to witness yourself, this is something that is reflected in the TV screen that they perceive to be a mirror. So it is still being used in Uzbekistan, Ainai Jihan. And in the medicine, is that you do not need to have the conventional testing devices, but you do it in the endoscopic fashion, ultrasound and CT, so it is less invasive than before, then it does not involve as much physical contact as it did. So when we think of it this way, then it is just a natural progression of human evolution that we are getting less physical or the less face-to-face with the COVID-19. Of course, that the human history tells us that we have never overcame this infectious disease such as MERS, SARS, and AIDS, but we've had developed our own immune system and the global collaboration and the medical innovation. Then we have strengthened our overall immune system and some parts of the immune system to respond better to this viral infection. So far, we do not have any particular cure or the vaccine against the COVID-19, but it would not be long before we have one. But because of this fear that we have closed down our national borders and we have to live in a haphazard fashion, but ultimately, through the international collaboration and the joint research, we need to overcome this challenge that the humanity is faced with. So, this loosely structured global collaboration system will soon be replaced with a more solid and more coarsely or a more densely created collaboration system. So we used to say that united we stand, divided we fall, but it is completely opposite these days. When we are united, then we fall, but divided, we might survive. But it will not last long. It should not last long. We have to get back with each other. And in the interim, the government intervention and the control has become a serious problem. But Professor Jared Diamond, who is a well-known author of the Guns, Germs, and the Steel, said that this is just to intervention and control by the state is the price we should pay to live with the strangers. So going to the main part of my talk is that we need to have the depth in the soul searching for our lives, and we need to have a control of our urge, our desire, and that should be the new global agenda. So right after, ever since the Industrial Revolution, so thanks to the innovation that is fueled by the capitalism and innovation, that we were able to enjoy the times of abundance that is fueled by the mass production. But nowadays, this physical capitalism or the material capitalism is not a way to go, but we do not have any alternatives. So we are in the process of finding a new innovation and a new way forward within the context of capitalism. But in the longer term, we need to control our desire, and corporations should produce and manufacture in the right amount. So it is not a matter of choice, then it will have to be a necessity. So for the corporation, for the short time, will have to manage the productivity, and of course that they will not be able to shift far away from this trend, but we'll have to encourage the production and consumption in an appropriate degree and amount. Of course, that we've had many cases and examples and the remnants of what has happened in the past, but I'd like to share with you some of the tribes that I've studied. In Africa, near Tanzania, there is a tribe called Hadja. and they are very traditional tribes. They do the harvesting. And as the national park of Serengeti has expanded and their living space has shrunk. So to survive for a couple of weeks, then they will require the two boars, but hunting has become more difficult. So for 10 days, they were not able to hunt anything. But unless they hunt within the next 3-4 days, the whole tribe will starve. But there is a reconnaissance that there is a big school of boars nearby. So the 20, 30 young men, went out. And this 20-year-old young girl shot this poison arrow, and he was successful in hunting a boar. So there was a feast, and the tribe chieftain actually allocated the meat. But this young man, Angro, was crouching about 10 meters away. And the scholar actually asked this question. He should be a hero. And how come he is not joining this feast? Then you should treat him better. But they got angry. Is that man, that fella, received this social respect and this envy of all the people, and he has become the most eligible bachelor. So he has all this social capital, and it is unfair for him to join in the distribution of the physical goods that are made from the board. So this physical possession should not be the value of a human existence. So there should be some kind of balance between what you own spiritually, religiously, and the network that you have established with the people around you. It should receive more respect, and that is something that the humanity post COVID-19 should think about. So there are Maasai tribe that lives next to in Kenya. So what I've shared with you is not confined to just one tribe. And Dr. Lee, in his own book, has actually stressed upon the Maasai tribe's self-reliance. When they go out hunting, the Maasais, that they do not create or to prepare the arrows before, because they want to prepare the weapons that will be just enough to hunt that day. Once you establish the target in the morning, then you prepare all these weapons necessary that will be right for the catch of the day. That is has been the tradition. So we often call them as the barbaric or the tribes, but maybe they are the most sophisticated one, striking a balance between the physical positions and their balance with the nature. So I'm originally from Seoul, the city, and sometimes I was invited to a small village called Aksaray. And I actually heard an old story from a grandfather living in there in Turkey. And there was this stranger passing this village, and he actually looked at tombstone. And he read the tombstone. Then this is the tombstone of people who lived, and when they perished, and the years that they passed away have been written down. But the longest year of our survival was 13 years. and the average life expectancy was about 7 years. And he got really scared. So there could be some kind of a disease happening, infectious disease happening. So it will be quite risky and dangerous to live there. So he moved to the next village and stay there. And he asked about the village next to it. And what happened, that why people are living such a short lives. And he received an explanation that the people living in that village, then you do the evaluation of that day, that once you have the full and meaningful life or the meaningful day, that is the only day that you lived well, and you actually mark it on the wall. So when someone passed away, then his friends and the family actually calculate the number of days that he lived to the fullest, and that will be the life that this person has led. So we need to put more value to the meaning. So we need to have a more revolutionary change of your perspective that puts more value to something that is intangible. Because when we look back at our history, there are so many occasions where your desires were not controlled, and that led to some perish. Is that when you look at the year 834, during the area of three kingdoms, and the king that is during the King Hengdek's era, and it traded this largest amount of gold. So the gold crown that was excavated from the whole world, 80% of them was actually found in the land of the old Silla dynasty. So there were such abundance of gold in these luxury goods. And the king actually announced this decree that the government will restrict the use of imported luxury products. And it is as if we had the same or the similar financial crisis that we have experienced in the late 1990s. Then, how come all of those luxury goods, well, it didn't come through Busan because Busan was not a port city. So about 1,200 years ago, then there was sea lane or the maritime lane connecting Constantinople to Ulsan. So it starts in the second week of April. So it sailed through the Indian Ocean, through the Bay of Malacca. So after 6 months of sail, then you come to the Guangzhou, to China. And Hangzhou, that is the port that you start sailing to Korea. So during the fair weather, then you reach to South Korea within 10 days. And that also follows the current. And this is the route that are still being used. And we do have these records. So according to the Evan Krudadvir, who is an Arabic geographer, and it was actually depicted in the 9th century. So it started from the Gulf Straits and through Hormuz Strait and to Malacca, and it reached Korea. So all culture were completely open in the 9th century. So it is historically in our gene and in our nature to be open to the world. So we should break away from this isolation that was imposed upon us because of this global pandemic and be a part of the global community. So of course, then from this threat, then you should protect your family, your community, your country. So the first instinct is to avoid having any contact with someone that you don't know. And in this situation, people might have large amount of hatred for foreigners, immigrants, those who are underprivileged. And it has happened before, is that Holocaust and Islamophobia and these kind of genocides and the cultural and historical tragedy we have experienced before. And recently, we have unfortunate incidents of terrorism happening in France. And the Holy Muhammad was depicted as a naked man, the layman, or the homosexual. And it is such a cruel thing that are not appreciating this religious and the cultural heritage. And the hatred might lead to something that's extraordinarily sad and savage. And so that is why the COVID-19 is something that the whole humanity should overcome. And many historians and the philosophers these days said that the whole globe is something that are dynamically linked with each other, so we would require some more closer cooperation. So recently, Professor Kup Chun at Georgetown University, of course, the U.S.-China conflict is an immediate or imminent issue, but something that is inevitable is an equal and reasonable international order, because it is not a matter of choice, but a matter of survival. So these pluralistic societies will have to be a new order. And he is not alone. And finally, I'd like to share with you this beautiful tulip called Semper Augustus. So this is the most expensive tulip in the Netherlands. At times, it was as expensive as 100 million Korean won. What is unique about this tulip is that when you first brought in this tulip, then it cannot survive. Bulb cannot survive. But this tulip was unique because it survived the soil and it survived this virus, and it came out as this unimaginably beautiful shape. So if we cannot eradicate coronavirus, what we can do is that we try to find a way of peaceful coexistence. Maybe we can create something extraordinarily beautiful. So I want to share with you the spirit of Semper Augustus. So we should move away from this hatred and exclusion, but move towards the coexistence and the symbiosis and co-prosperity. I wanted to share this with you from the perspective of anthropologist, and hopefully you can have a fresh perspective in the area of pandemic. So yeah, that was indeed a beautiful talk that ended with the beautiful tulip. So once again, big hands to Professor Lee. So coexistence and symbiosis and inclusion.